Breaking news on that earthquake that was felt all along the East Coast and right here in Northeast Ohio. Our newsroom was just flooded with calls from viewers around 2 o'clock this afternoon.
Yeah, the quake was a 5.8 magnitude, the strongest in this part of the country since 1897, and some aftershocks are still likely tonight. Now, it was centered in Mineral, Virginia, and people felt it from New York City to North Carolina and as far north as Ottawa, Canada.
Parts of the Pentagon, White House, and Capitol were evacuated. Cell phone service in parts of the eastern United States was also affected. Now, across Cuyahoga County and other areas, we talked to people who felt the ground moving under their feet, especially in Cleveland. Some told us they saw lights gently swaying, and the shaking made others feel sick, even a little queasy. More on that just ahead. But first, the shaking was much worse closer to the epicenter. Right now, all memorials and monuments in Washington, D.C. are closed. And
check this out. This is video from the ABC News camera pointed at the White House, and you can see the shaking happening there, and that is about 90 miles away from the epicenter in Virginia. ABC's John Hendren has been monitoring the situation in Washington, D.C. and around the area, and we're going to have a report on what was happening down there when this all happened just before 2 this afternoon.
It was the biggest quake on record in the Mid-Atlantic. In Washington, it rocked the marble pillars of the Capitol. It rattled the White House.
We were sitting in a meeting and the ground started shaking and then the building started shaking.
Across official Washington, federal workers flooded the streets as the Capitol Hill complex, the White House, and the Pentagon were evacuated.
Ceiling tiles were jumping in and out of the ceiling.
The magnitude 5.9 temblor radiated from an epicenter 88 miles southwest of Washington. But the radiating shutters convulsed the ground as far south as the Carolinas. They rumbled the ground in New York, shaking the federal courthouse.
It felt a little unnerving when your floor's swaying and you're on the 21st floor.
As far north as Massachusetts, where President Obama was vacationing on Martha's Vineyard. At Reagan National Airport, flights were grounded.
We all kind of grabbed our things and said it's time to get out the building.
The initial damage appeared minimal, despite the biggest quake on record here in the Mid-Atlantic.
The previous record was set last July, a magnitude 3.6, so this was historic for the East Coast, but nothing like the temblors you see in Japan or the West Coast. To put it in perspective, one Californian said on Twitter, "The vibrate setting on my cell phone is stronger." John Hendren, ABC News, Washington.
Well, here in Northeast Ohio, people in downtown Cleveland ended up coming out of their high-rises wondering what happened. Well, we have continuing coverage of this breaking news now with Dan Haggerty.
Dan is live at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We're rocking and rolling with a big talker right now. Hey, Dan.
Hey, what's going on, guys? I was wondering a little bit what happened when I felt it also. I was downtown sitting in the car. I felt the shaking. I never felt an earthquake before. I figured it felt a little bit like that, and then I started seeing all these buildings being evacuated and people rolling out. Now, if you thought it felt a little strange from where you were, maybe you were on the first or second floor of an office, maybe you were at home, maybe you were in your car like me. Well, I talked to some people. Imagine what it felt like all the way up there.
Man, I was sitting in the car, man, I don't know what happened, man, but I was sitting in the car looking at my phone, it started rocking.
We just sat down and the desk shook a little bit and then it came again, and it was just enough to make people worry.
It felt like I was on a boat and it was rocking.
This was the scene downtown right after the quake.
We evacuated the building. Everybody just took the stairs and got out of there. Didn't last all that long, but it started off pretty subtly and then got pretty intense pretty quick.
Many buildings downtown were evacuated. These people from the county courthouse gathered on the sidewalk. Others scrambled from nearly every tall building in town, including the tallest, Key Tower, at 57 floors.
It felt like it moved a good 2 feet.
Stan Zahan was more than halfway up the 1,000-foot building, and the higher you are, the more dramatic the experience.
There were a few runners, but yeah, everybody kind of needed a minute after that to kind of realize what happened and say, okay, we're good.
And again, as I said before, I didn't know what it was at first. Same goes for a lot of the people who I talked to. Their first reaction wasn't, oh, this is an earthquake. I asked a lot of people what they thought it was at first. Some interesting responses, some of them funny, some of them kind of scary. We'll have them coming up in about an hour. We'll see you at 6. Reporting live, I'm Dan Haggerty, News Channel 5.
Heard a lot of them in the newsroom. Thank you, Dan.
Absolutely. Well, you know, ODOT was just a little concerned about the quake. So their engineers did an inspection of the Interbelt Bridge and Main Avenue Bridge over the Shoreway after that earthquake.
And both bridges are fine from the shaking. There are no problems to report.
You know, we have a seismograph right here in Cleveland at the Museum of Natural History, and it shows the power of this earthquake.
Our team coverage continues on this breaking news with meteorologist Jason Nicholas. Jason.
Well, John, we certainly felt the Virginia quake here in northern Ohio, not only with our bodies, inside buildings, and on our streets, but the shaking was also captured on paper. Check this out. This shows what happened at about 10 before 2. The needle began shaking vigorously out at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. It shook for a good 10 minutes and also even more so after those aftershocks. It's very sensitive. In fact, the needle shook violently. The pen couldn't dispense the ink quick enough. This quake, centered about 40 miles northwest of Richmond, Virginia, is quite rare.
It's not common that you get earthquakes from this area of the country. You get infrequent smaller earthquakes, but rarely over 4.5. This is the largest one they've had in this zone since 1897, when there was another 5.9 magnitude earthquake.
Okay, let's take a look at the Power 5 here. Now, the USGS has since downgraded this quake from a 5.9 to a 5.8. Here is where the earthquake hit. It was relatively shallow, so that's why we were able to feel it here in northern Ohio. But the distance between Mineral, Virginia and Cleveland, Ohio, about 320 miles. The quake occurred in an area known as the Virginia Seismic Zone. It was felt up and down the East Coast and, of course, here in northern Ohio, the strongest quake in Virginia in more than 100 years. Tracy.
All right, Jay, thanks a lot. You know, our news partners at WAKR in Akron had their phone lines lighting up as well.
Yeah, people describing what it is they felt in the Summit County area.
I kind of felt like I was getting dizzy or something, and our mini blinds were shaking, our hanging plants were shaking, and it just felt like I was floating or something.
I was sitting in my back room watching a DVR movie, so I was sitting still, and all of a sudden the chair started to tremble a little bit from side to side.
Well, the incredible and unpredictable power of the Earth on display this afternoon. Newsnet5.com sent out a breaking news alert as soon as the shaking started, and we felt it in the newsroom, and your reaction was the same as mine, which was?
Absolutely. I thought somebody was behind my chair.
Playing a joke on you.
Right.
You felt that kind of swaying back and forth. Incredible.
Wasn't. It was kind of weird. We will have much more on the quake throughout the hour. Remember to keep checking Newsnet5.com for the very latest anytime.